Tonia hadn't planned to come home that afternoon. The women's conference at the retreat center was supposed to run until Sunday evening, but after the last session ended ahead of schedule and the closing prayers wrapped up earlier than planned, the organizers released them with warm hugs, parting gifts, and promises to stay in touch. As she rolled her small suitcase across the compound, the sun resting gently on her cheeks, she felt that familiar pull toward home, the smell of her own pillowcase. Her son's laughter echoing through the sitting room, the way Darrel usually dropped his phone when she walked in, lifted her bag playfully, and asked, "Madam, how was the ministration?" She smiled at the thought, and when the driver of the ride-hailing car helped her load her bag into the boot, she sent Darrel a casual text. Sessions went well. So blessed. She intentionally did not add that she was on her way back. A small surprise would be sweet, she thought. A peaceful, simple surprise. The ride back felt strangely calm. Houses, palm trees, and little roadside stalls slid past her window like moving pictures. And Tonia found herself replaying some of the teachings from the conference about self-worth, emotional safety, and listening to the quiet voice inside. She chuckled at how one of the speakers had joked that sometimes the Holy Spirit is not mysterious. He's just that discomfort you are ignoring. She looked out at the streets of Lagos, people hustling, cars honking, life marching forward, and she whispered a quiet prayer of thanks for her family. She thought of her son, Ethan, and imagined his small feet thudding across the tiles as he ran into her arms at the door. She pictured Darrel's smile, the way he sometimes surprised her with freshly cut fruits when she returned tired from events like this. Nothing in her mind had space for betrayal at that moment. Life felt ordinary, predictable, and stable in the softest way. When the car finally turned into their estate and rolled towards their duplex, Tonia felt that homely tug of gratitude. She paid the driver, pulled her suitcase handle up, and wheeled it towards the front door. Everything looked normal, the potted plant by the entrance, the shoes by the small rack, the curtains in the living room half drawn. She slipped her key in and turned it, expecting the light thud of small feet running excitedly. But as she stepped into the sitting room, she was greeted instead by a quietness that felt almost padded, a gentle, heavy silence that did not belong to a house with a playful child. She frowned slightly, dropped her handbag on the console by the door, and called out, "Ethan." Her voice floated out into the still air and came back unanswered. She glanced at the time. It wasn't late. He should at least be making noise somewhere. Her heart didn't race yet, but something in her chest sat up, listening. Tonia wheeled her suitcase further in and left it near the dining area, her eyes scanning the sitting room automatically. The throw pillows were not where she left them, but that wasn't unusual. Children had a way of rearranging a home. The TV remote lay on the center table. A glass cup with a faint lipstick mark sat beside it. Her eyes lingered on that cup. She hadn't used any glass before leaving, and she hadn't worn lipstick either because the conference emphasis was on simplicity. The shade on the rim of the glass was a bold, glossy color she never wore in the house. Her brows pinched for a moment, but she quickly pushed the thought back, telling herself not to overthink. Maybe Darrel had guests earlier. Maybe his sister had come over with a friend. Still, she carried the glass between her fingers as if the stem carried a whisper. She dropped the glass in the kitchen sink gently and walked back into the corridor. "Darrel," she called, this time with a slight edge to her voice. No answer. The guest room door was wide open and empty, the bed neatly made. The door to the study was firmly shut, but when she tried the handle, it turned easily. The study was empty too, the chair slightly angled away from the desk, as if someone had risen in a hurry. She stared around for a brief second, then stepped back, her mind beginning to register that something about this silence was curated. It felt like someone had pressed pause on the house. She remembered suddenly that she hadn't seen her son's school bag near the dining area where it usually was. A flicker of anxiety moved through her. She grabbed her phone from her handbag and checked if she had missed any calls from Darrel or her sister. Nothing. It was when she stepped back into the corridor that she heard it, a soft, gentle sound coming from the direction of her bedroom. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't music. It was the heavy, steady breath of someone deeply asleep, drifting in and out of a light snore. Tonia froze for a second, her ears straining. That was not the sound of a child. It had the weight of an adult's fatigue. Her heart, which had been calm a few minutes ago, now began to beat with a slow, hollow thud. She noticed then that her bedroom door was not closed fully. It was slightly ajar, just enough for the snoring sound to slip into the corridor like a secret that refused to stay hidden. She took a step forward, then another, each footfall feeling like she was stepping deeper into a reality she did not ask for. Her hand reached out and held the edge of the door, the wood cool under her fingers. As she pushed it open, the sight that met her eyes rearranged her world in one sharp, silent moment. On her bed, a bed she paid for, prayed on, wept on, and loved on, lay a woman she had never seen before, sprawled in easy sleep, breathing softly with her mouth just slightly open. The stranger's wig had been flung carelessly to one side of the bed, her natural hair cornrowed flat against her head. She wore one of Tonia's satin night robes, the champagne-colored one Darrel had bought her on their last anniversary. The belt of the robe had come loose, revealing the shape of thighs that didn't belong to this house, resting on sheets that still carried Tonia's scent. One leg was half dangling off the bed, the other tucked under her, as if she had tossed and turned in familiar comfort before surrendering to a nap. There was an empty juice pack and a small plate with melon seeds on the bedside table. This was not the first time she had relaxed here. The room carried the arrogance of repetition. For a few seconds, Tonia's brain refused to translate what her eyes were seeing. The air felt thick, heavier than usual, as though the room itself was ashamed. Her first instinct was not to scream, not to throw anything, not to pull the woman off the bed. Instead, her body went very still. An eerie calm settled over her features, the kind that comes when pain is too deep to express yet. Her thoughts raced backward through time, scanning every moment that now seemed suspicious in hindsight. The nights Darrel had insisted she should attend more church retreat programs. The weekends he had encouraged her to rest away from the stress and leave Ethan with his sister. The times he seemed a little too relaxed when she traveled. Her fingers tightened around the handle of the door, but her voice, when it finally came, was steady. "Get up," she said softly, not raising it above normal speaking level. But the weight in those two words could have moved furniture. The woman on the bed stirred and yawned, blinking herself back into consciousness. For a split second, her expression was the vague confusion of someone trying to remember where they were. Then her eyes focused on the figure standing by the door. She sat up slowly, squinting as if her brain was trying to load a picture it didn't expect. When recognition hit, when she realized this was not a housekeeper, not a random person, but the rightful owner of the room, her reaction was instant and violent. She screamed. Not a small yelp, but a sharp, piercing scream that bounced off the walls. She grabbed at the sheet to cover herself, rolling too close to the edge and landing on the floor with a heavy thud. "Jesus! Jesus! Oh my God!" she cried, scrambling clumsily, dragging the duvet with her. Tonia did not move. She watched her, her eyes cold and quiet. "Good afternoon," Tonia said, with a politeness that sounded like a knife. "Since you're comfortable enough to sleep in my room, on my bed, in my robe, let's introduce ourselves properly." Sheila's scream finally choked itself into a trembling whimper as she crouched on the floor, clutching the duvet to her chest like a lifeline. She kept stuttering apologies that made no sense. Half-sentences, broken phrases, desperate explanations that contradicted each other. "I didn't know, I thought," he said. "You weren't, please, I'm sorry." Her hands shook so violently that the duvet kept slipping, and she kept tugging it back up in frantic little jerks. Tonia watched her with the stillness of a surgeon preparing for an incision. No blinking, no movement, just a woman whose silence was more frightening than shouting. Finally, Sheila attempted to rise to her feet, wobbling, her eyes darting toward the door as if she could outrun shame itself. But Tonia simply lifted one finger, slowly, deliberately, and Sheila froze mid-movement as if that finger were a gun pointed at her. Tonia walked calmly into the room, closed the door with a soft click, and slid the lock shut. That sound alone made Sheila's knees buckle. She collapsed back onto the floor, shaking her head with frantic, terrified little jerks. "Please don't hurt me. Please don't call anyone," she whispered. She did not yet understand that Tonia was not a woman who needed to shout, fight, or call people to defend her. Pain had carved a calmness inside her that was sharper than any weapon. Tonia dragged her vanity stool and placed it in the center of the room with slow precision, then sat on it, crossing her legs elegantly. "You will sit down," she said to Sheila, "and you will not move again until I say so." Sheila obeyed immediately, sliding backward until her spine hit the side of the bed. Tonia then asked a question so softly it felt like a blade wrapped in velvet. "Who gave you permission to sleep in my room, wear my robe, and rest your body on what is mine?" Sheila swallowed hard, her lips trembling. I didn't come on my own," she stammered. "Darrel. He said." Her voice cracked. She looked up, terrified to continue, but Tonia's expression forced truth from her. "He said you wouldn't be back until tonight. He said the house would be free. He sent Ethan to your sister's place. He told me to relax here." The words spilled out like blood from a wound. Every sentence rearranged something inside Tonia, but her face remained cold, unreadable. It was in that moment, when she confirmed her husband had planned this betrayal carefully, deliberately, that the first wall of mercy inside her crumbled. Tonia reached quietly for her phone, unlocked it, and placed it face down on her lap. Sheila didn't understand yet, but she would. The doorknob turned suddenly from the outside. Sheila gasped and clutched the duvet. Tonia's eyes narrowed. The door pushed open slightly, and Darrel walked in, smiling, holding a silver tray of freshly cut fruits arranged neatly beside a glass of chilled juice. His confidence filled the doorway until he saw the scene. The smile fell off his face like a mask. Dropping. The tray slipped from his hands, crashing onto the tiles, melons, pineapples, grapes rolling everywhere in a chaotic metaphor of his double life collapsing in real time. "To Tonia," he whispered, as if his tongue suddenly weighed too much to lift. His whole body seemed to tilt, like someone whose soul had left before his body realized it. He looked at Sheila, then at Tonia, then at the locked door, and his knees nearly buckled. Tonia did not blink. She did not stand. She did not even look at the spilled fruits staining her tiles. She pointed at the door behind him, and her voice came out like ice melting slowly. "Close it." Darrel, shaking, obeyed. When the door clicked shut, she added, "Lock it." He hesitated only 1 second before twisting the lock. Now all three of them were trapped in that room, husband, mistress, and wife, breathing the same heavy air of revelation. "Sit down," she said. He stood still, trembling. "Darrel," she repeated, "sit down." He sank to the floor beside Sheila. Both of them crouched like children awaiting punishment, both avoiding each other's eyes. Tonia lifted her phone and pressed the record button. The red light glowed between them like a judge's stare. "Since you have both decided to use my home, my bed, my robe, and my absence to create your own little paradise," she said slowly, "you will now educate me." Her voice did not rise, it deepened. "You will tell me how this began. Every place you have been, every lie you told, every detail of what you have done behind my back." Darrel's mouth fell open. "Tonia, please." "Let me explain. You will explain," she cut in sharply, on camera. Sheila's breath hitched. Darrel's face drained of color. Tonia sat upright, her eyes sharp enough to slice through bone. "Begin," she commanded. From the very first day, the room went still. The red recording light blinked. And slowly, like sinners forced to read their own confessions aloud, the truth began to pour out. Darrel's voice shook as he began the confession, the words coming out in fragments at first, as though each one cut his throat on the way out. "It started months ago," he said, staring at the floor as if he wished it would swallow him. He explained that he met Sheila at a work event. She was catering for the venue, serving drinks, smiling too brightly, leaning too close. He admitted how he allowed her attention to make him feel desirable again, how he mistook her flirtation for admiration, how he told himself it was harmless. Tonia listened, her face expressionless, but her fingers tightened around the edges of her phone. Sheila added trembling details, How Darrel had complimented her dress that day. How he said he felt unappreciated at home. How she believed him because he said it with a tired smile. Tonia didn't interrupt. She didn't defend herself. She simply let the truth burn them as it came. Once Darrel's courage found its footing, more spilled out. Lies he had stitched together so expertly that even he had begun to live inside them. He confessed how he saved Sheila's number under a male colleague's name, how they first met at a small lounge near his office, how he told Tonia he had urgent paperwork that night, how he returned home acting tired from work when in fact he was tired from something else entirely. Sheila, shaking, corroborated every detail, sometimes adding moments Darrel had conveniently omitted. The day he brought her suya in his car, the afternoon he drove her to a quiet park, and they sat talking for hours, laughing at jokes that weren't even funny. Tonia's stomach twisted, but her face remained stone-like. Her silence was the courtroom, and both of them were defendants unveiling their crimes. As the confession deepened, Darrel began to sweat, his shirt clinging to his back. He disclosed how he gradually normalized the relationship in his mind, how he created pockets of time by pushing Tonia toward programs, meetings, even self-care retreats. He confessed how he sometimes intentionally encouraged her to travel, telling her she needed fresh air and breathing space, all while clearing the home for Sheila. Hearing that, something inside Tonia snapped, not outwardly, but quietly, like glass cracking in a frame. Darrel's voice grew fainter as he realized the magnitude of what he was saying. He had not only betrayed her, he had manipulated her peace to provide comfort for another woman. Sheila sobbed softly through her fingers. Tonia pressed the phone closer. "Continue," she said. And he did, because he no longer had the strength to lie. As the interrogation pushed forward, Tonia shifted her stool slightly, her back straight, her eyes sharp. "Locations," she said. "Everywhere you've been together." Darrel wiped his forehead, his voice trembling as he listed them. One hotel on the island, a short-let apartment a friend had recommended, a small restaurant they frequented on weekday afternoons. Each place was a memory he barely wanted to admit, but the red recording light forced honesty. Sheila jumped in nervously, explaining which rooms they used, the corners where they sat, the nights she stayed too long, and Darrel rushed her out before Tonia returned. They spoke like people confessing in a police station, their voices cracking under the weight of their own deceit. Tonia remembered each weekend she spent away, each church conference she traveled for, each time Darrel encouraged her to stay an extra day. Now, the puzzle pieces slid into place like a mocking picture. But beyond the locations, there were behaviors, rituals of secrecy. Sheila confessed how Darrel would silence his phone the moment she entered his car, how he saved her pictures inside a hidden folder under financial documents, how he deleted entire chat histories just minutes before returning home. Darrel confessed how he used a separate email to communicate with her, how he sometimes pretended to be stuck in traffic when he was actually sitting in a bar holding Sheila's hand. Each revelation twisted the room tighter, suffocating even the air. Tonia's chest rose and fell slowly, deliberately, as if she refused to let pain decide her breathing. Then came the revelation that stung differently. Darrel admitted that he sent Ethan away not because of errands, not for bonding with his aunt, not due to sudden plans, but simply because Sheila was coming over. He had orchestrated an empty home, making sure no child's laughter interfered with his deceit. Sheila nodded in agreement. "He asked me to come early," she whispered. "He said the house would be free." That was the moment Tonia's composure cracked for the first time, not visibly, but internally, like a knife sliding between ribs. She felt something cold drip into her spirit. She steadied her voice. "Next," she said. "We're not done." With each question Tonia asked, Darrel's answers became more humiliating, as if a floodgate had burst and truth was leaking from wounds he couldn't close. She told him to describe how long each phase of their relationship lasted, and he obeyed. He confessed how the first month felt like a mistake, how the second month felt like freedom, and how by the third month he was actively chasing the thrill. Sheila added that he sometimes brought her small gifts, things Tonia recognized instantly. A bracelet she once asked him to buy her, but he claimed was too expensive. A perfume she had been hinting at for months, but he said wasn't his style. Tonia felt a sharp pain under her ribs, but remained silent. She let them dig their own graves word by word. The more they talked, the more ashamed they became, because they were now revealing moments they never meant to make public. Sheila admitted how she once stayed in Tonia's room overnight during a previous trip, how she wore another one of Tonia's night robes, and even took pictures on the bed. Darrel confessed how he had once cooked for Sheila in that same kitchen, using Tonia's cookware because she likes your seasoning style. Tonia's mouth tightened slightly, but her expression stayed calm, unbroken. She realized then that betrayal wasn't just physical, it was the emotional mockery behind it, the comfort they carved for themselves in spaces sacred to her. When Darrel began fumbling over dates, Tonia leaned forward and asked him to repeat them. Not in anger, but with surgical precision. She made him state each timeline clearly for the recording, ensuring no detail would later be twisted or forgotten. Sheila added specific occasions. Days Tonia had traveled for women's retreats. The weekend the electricity was out and they lit candles in the living room. The night she slept over and left early before dawn. Tonia's throat tightened, but she refused to let tears dignify the confession. Instead, she asked one devastating question. Was there ever a day you felt guilty enough to stop? The silence that followed was the loudest sound the room had held so far. The confessions continued until Sheila's voice began to falter under pressure. She shifted uncomfortably, pulling the duvet closer, glancing nervously at Darrel, as if warning him not to expose something. Tonia noticed the sudden change in her body language, the way her palms pressed against her stomach, the way she kept averting her gaze when certain dates were mentioned. Tonia's intuition sharpened. Sheila, she said quietly, what are you hiding? Sheila swallowed hard, shaking her head too quickly. Nothing, she whispered. But Tonia had seen enough lies that afternoon to recognize the birth of another one. She stood up slowly, walked to Sheila, crouched in front of her, and spoke with terrifying gentleness. Look at me. Sheila lifted her eyes once, then immediately dropped them again. Tonia repeated, what are you hiding? Sheila's breath hitched. Her fingers tightened on the duvet. And then she broke. I didn't want to say it like this, she cried. I didn't want you to find out this way. Darrel's head snapped toward her, eyes wide. Find out what? He asked, voice cracking. Sheila started sobbing, pressing her palms to her face. I'm pregnant, she whispered. I'm pregnant for Darrel. The room spun. Darrel's mouth fell open in pure disbelief, as though he was hearing it for the first time. Pregnant, he repeated, voice trembling with confusion and fear. Sheila nodded violently, her tears spilling. I found out 2 weeks ago. I was waiting for the right time to tell him. Tonia did not move. Her soul froze in place before her body did. She stood slowly, her breath controlled, her face frighteningly still. She walked back to the stool, sat down, pressed the phone closer, and said, say it clearly. For the recording. Sheila wiped her face, trembling, and repeated the confession word for word, stating the exact date she discovered the pregnancy, the hospital she visited, and the appointment she had been preparing for. Darrel sat in stunned silence, his hands on his head. Tonia's chest tightened so severely she wondered if her ribs had cracked. But she held herself upright. Continue, she whispered. There is more. Because she knew there always was. The weight in the room shifted after the pregnancy revelation, as though the betrayal had grown limbs and now stood between them, breathing heavily. Darrel tried to speak, tried to deny, tried to explain, tried to construct a reality gentler than the one collapsing around him. But the confession had already done its damage. His voice broke as he said, Tonia, I didn't know. She never told me. Sheila, sobbing, insisted she had been trying to find the courage, that she feared he would leave her if she said it too soon. Their voices overlapped like two people drowning in the consequences they created. Tonia listened, her posture regal despite the storm inside her. She let their panic wash over the room before she lifted a hand and silenced them both. She leaned forward slowly, placed the phone down with precision, and spoke with a calmness that made the air colder. You have both spent months sharing secrets, sharing lies, sharing a bed under my roof. Today, you will share the consequences. Darrel's eyes filled with terror, not of punishment, but of losing her. "Tonia, please," he whispered, crawling slightly closer. "Please, don't leave. Don't make a decision yet. Let's talk. Let's fix this. I made a mistake." She cut him off with one subtle gesture. "A mistake is a wrong phone number," she said softly. "A mistake is burnt food. This was a project." She stood up, tall, composed, devastatingly elegant in her silence. She walked to the door, unlocked it, then turned and delivered the sentence that would haunt them both forever. "I will not destroy you. I will only remove myself from where I am not valued." Sheila's sobs intensified. Darrel collapsed further. And Tonia, with a dignity that no betrayal could stain, stepped out of the room, leaving them to face what they had created. The recording still blinked red on her phone, and the truth, once spoken, could never again be buried. Tonia stepped into the hallway, closing the bedroom door behind her, not in anger, but in finality. Her steps were slow and deliberate, as if she were walking through the remnants of a life she once trusted. She entered the walk-in closet, breathing in the faint lavender scent from her wardrobe sachets, a scent that usually calmed her, but now only reminded her of how much of herself she had poured into a home that no longer felt like hers. She opened the top drawer of her closet, removed her important documents, jewelry boxes, and a few personal items she couldn't afford to leave behind. Each item she folded into her suitcase felt like a piece of her dignity being reclaimed. For the first time in hours, a tear slid down her cheek, but she wiped it away quickly, not because she didn't feel pain, but because she refused to let betrayal reshape her spirit. As she packed, memories filled the silence. Birthdays celebrated on this bed, nights of laughter, whispered prayers they once shared holding hands. It wasn't the presence of Sheila that broke her. It was the realization that Darrel had allowed their marriage to rot quietly behind closed doors while she thought they were healing. She folded her clothes with care, even though her heart was splintering, because she believed in leaving with the same grace she had always carried. The home suddenly felt unfamiliar, like a place she had outgrown. The walls seemed to echo conversations she once believed in, and now those echoes tasted like lies. She zipped up her bag, inhaling deeply to steady herself. She checked her reflection in the mirror, eyes red but steady, posture upright, spirit bruised but unbroken. She whispered softly to her reflection, "This is not how my story ends." She reached for her phone, stopped the recording, saved it to multiple folders, and backed it up to her cloud drive. Evidence. Truth. Closure. She lifted her suitcase and walked toward the living room with a quiet dignity that made the air shift around her, as though the house itself recognized that something sacred was walking away from it. Behind the bedroom door, she could still hear the muffled voices of Darrel and Sheila crumbling under the weight of their confessions, but she had no intention of returning to them. Eventually, the bedroom door opened behind her, but Tonia did not turn. She heard Sheila's hesitant footsteps shuffling across the hallway tiles, small, frightened taps, like someone terrified of their own shadow. Sheila clutched the duvet around herself, her wig half on, half off, her shame falling around her like broken jewelry. "Ma," she whispered, her voice quivering. She wanted permission to leave. She wanted release from the pressure in the room. She wanted anything that resembled mercy. Tonia didn't respond. She simply lifted her chin, still facing forward. Sheila stood there trembling, her hands gripping the fabric so tightly her knuckles whitened. There was a long moment where time paused, the mistress waiting for the wife's decree. Without turning, Tonia finally spoke, her voice cold and clear. "Pick your things. All of them. Every single one." Sheila scrambled back into the bedroom, grabbing her shoes, her bag, her scattered belongings, moving with frantic energy like a thief forced to return stolen goods. She kept sobbing small, broken sounds that filled the corridor. When she re-emerged, she looked like a wreckage, hair disheveled, eyes swollen, dignity shredded. Tonia still did not turn. She simply gestured toward the front door with one quiet command, "Leave." And Sheila obeyed instantly, nearly stumbling on the rug as she hurried out. Her exit was neither graceful nor composed. It was the escape of someone who realized too late that she had stepped into a life she had no right to touch. As the front door clicked shut behind Sheila, The housekeeper emerged from a kitchen quietly, her eyes wide with disbelief at the unfolding drama. Tonia met her gaze calmly and said, "Please clean the hallway." The housekeeper nodded and immediately fetched the mop and broom. As she began sweeping behind Sheila's trail, it created a visual erasure, footprint after footprint being wiped away, as if removing the mistress's presence from the home one stroke at a time. Tonia watched this silently, her chest heavy, but her spirit clarifying. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to insult Sheila, didn't need to drag her outside. Humiliation had already completed its work. The house no longer held any trace of the woman except the echoes of her bad decisions. When Sheila was gone, Darrel finally emerged from the bedroom looking like a man who had aged 10 years in one afternoon. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes swollen, his lips trembling as though each breath cut him. He stepped slowly into the living room, his entire posture bent under the weight of what he had confessed. "Tonia," he whispered, voice hoarse. He looked at her packed luggage and collapsed to his knees, as if his bones had given up holding him together. "Please, please don't leave. I beg you. I beg you with everything." But Tonia didn't speak. She watched him calmly, her silence more powerful than his groveling. He crawled closer, but stopped when she raised her hand slightly, a boundary he now feared to cross. He began begging with desperation that bordered on pathetic. He told her he was weak, that he was stupid, that he let the devil use him, that he never meant for things to go this far. He talked in circles, contradicting himself, crying openly like a child afraid of being abandoned. But his tears didn't touch her anymore. They were tears of consequence, not repentance. Tonia stood still, letting the weight of his panic and regret fill the space, letting him unravel exactly the way he had unraveled their marriage behind her back. When he tried to hold her ankle, she stepped away. Not angrily, just decisively. "Don't touch me," she said quietly. Darrel wiped his face with trembling hands, shaking as though the floor beneath him had turned to ice. "I will cut her off. I will handle the pregnancy. I will fix everything. I will do anything you want. Please don't walk away." His voice cracked at the end, dissolving into a quiet sob. But Tonia's heart had already crossed a bridge he could no longer follow her across. This wasn't about anger anymore, it was clarity. She looked at him and saw not the man she married, but a stranger who had guided another woman into their bed without hesitation. The marriage was already cracked, but today it had shattered. With Darrel sobbing behind her, Tonia lifted her suitcase and walked toward the door with the grace of someone who had survived a storm and chosen not to drown in it. Each step felt like stepping out of a cage she didn't know she'd been living in. She opened the door and sunlight spilled inside, as if the outside world was welcoming her back to herself. Darrel scrambled to his feet and rushed after her, his voice breaking as he begged her to stay. "Tonia, please don't leave this house. Don't leave me. I can't survive it." But she didn't even look back at him. If she did, she feared her emotions might betray her dignity, and she refused to give betrayal that satisfaction. When she reached the porch, she inhaled deeply, the fresh air hitting her lungs like a reminder that life existed beyond this heartbreak. She descended the steps slowly, her spirit strengthening with each movement. Neighbors who saw her didn't need explanations. Her expression alone told the story. A quiet hush followed her path, the kind that falls when people witness dignity rise from ashes. Tonia walked to the gate, her heels crunching softly against the gravel, and signaled a taxi. Her hands did not shake. Her breathing remained steady. She was not running away. She was leaving correctly, intentionally, fully aware of her worth. As the taxi pulled up, she placed her suitcase inside and sat down without a backward glance. The driver asked where she was going. "To my sister's house," she said, her voice firm. As they drove away, she let the wind brush her face through the open window. The house she was leaving behind grew smaller in the rearview mirror, shrinking like a chapter being closed. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't felt in that home for months: freedom. Not the freedom of being alone, but the freedom of walking away from a lie that had tried to disguise itself as love. When Tonia arrived at her sister's house, The door flew open before she even knocked twice. Her sister, Miriam, took one look at her face and understood everything without a single word being spoken. She stepped aside silently, allowing Tonia to enter, then closed the door gently behind her as if protecting her from the outside world. Tonia didn't collapse. She didn't cry. She simply walked to the edge of the sofa and sat, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the floor. Miriam sat beside her quietly, not pressing for explanations, letting the silence cradle her sister until she was ready. After a long stretch of quiet, Tonia finally exhaled, a long, trembling breath that sounded like someone releasing a 1,000-pound weight from her chest. She narrated the events calmly, without theatrics, as if she were discussing someone else's life. Miriam listened with widening eyes, hands clasped tightly, heart breaking with every detail. When Tonia finished, Miriam reached for her hand and held it with fierce tenderness. "You did well," she said. "You protected your peace." Tonia nodded slowly, though the reality of everything hadn't fully settled in her bones yet. It felt like she had stepped out of her own life and was now watching the aftermath from a distance. Later that night, when the house grew quiet and her son fell asleep on her chest unaware of the storm swirling around the adults, Tonia finally allowed herself one moment of vulnerability. She closed her eyes and let silent tears flow, not for Darrel, not for Sheila, not even for the betrayal, but for the version of herself who had trusted blindly, loved fully, and hoped endlessly. She cried gently, privately, letting grief do its necessary work. And when the tears dried, she wiped her face, exhaled, and whispered to herself, "I will rise." Word began to travel before Tonia even settled fully into her sister's home. It wasn't Tonia who spoke, it was the echo of what Sheila had caused when she fled the house half-dressed, wig in one hand, dignity nowhere in sight. Neighbors had seen. Estate security had seen. The housekeeper had seen. And Lagos gossip was a wildfire. Once sparked, it moved faster than truth could breathe. Stories twisted, expanded, multiplied, each version more dramatic than the last. Some said Sheila fainted when she saw Tonia. Others claimed Darrel ran down the street crying after his wife. By sunset, half the estate knew Darrel's mistress had been caught sleeping in Tonia's robe on her marital bed. By nightfall, even distant relatives began calling Tonia's phone. She declined every call. She owed nobody explanations. Meanwhile, Darrel was suffocating under the consequences he had never imagined would come this quickly. His phone rang non-stop, friends asking what happened, family demanding explanations, one aunt giving unsolicited prayers about evil women who seduce married men, not knowing Darrel was the architect of his own downfall. At work, 2 colleagues who heard the rumors called to ask if it was true. He lied at first, then broke halfway and hung up. Shame wrapped itself around his body like a wet cloth he couldn't peel off. He spent the evening pacing the living room, replaying the moment Tonia walked out. The tray of fruit still lay on the floor, dried juice staining the tiles, like a quiet reminder of his foolishness. Alone with his thoughts, Darrel realized that silence was the worst punishment Tonia had chosen. She didn't shout. She didn't destroy the house. She didn't curse him. She left him with the weight of his own truth, and that weight grew heavier with each hour. He tried calling Tonia, but her phone stayed on silent. He sent texts, long paragraphs, voice notes filled with tears and broken promises. None received a response. And as the night deepened, Darrel felt something unfamiliar, fear. Not fear of losing a marriage for image's sake, but fear of losing a woman who had been the anchor of his existence. For the first time in his adult life, he understood that betrayal doesn't just break trust, it breaks the betrayer, too. Over the next several days, Tonia crafted a new routine for herself. She woke early, prepared Ethan's meals, attended to her interior decor clients, and returned every call from genuine friends while silencing the ones who only wanted gist. She found herself working harder than usual, not out of avoidance, but because productivity gave her a sense of control. The more she poured energy into her craft, the more she remembered who she was before her marriage had shrunk her confidence. Her clients noticed the renewed fire in her voice, the precision in her vision. One even commented, "You sound lighter." And Tonia smiled at that, because pain, when processed with dignity, does create a strange kind of lightness. Emotionally, she was healing in layers. Some moments she felt powerful, as though she had crossed an invisible bridge into a better version of herself. Other moments, she felt grief pinch her heart, the memory of Darrel's early sweetness, the dreams they once shared, the stability she thought she had. But every time those memories rose, she reminded herself that the man who betrayed her was not the man she married. Somewhere along the line, something in him had rotted quietly, choosing shortcuts to validation instead of the hard work of emotional honesty. She refused to blame herself. She refused to carry guilt that wasn't hers. Instead, she journaled her thoughts, prayed deeply at night, and allowed her sister's gentle support to wrap around her like warm cloth. As Tonia grew emotionally stronger, her physical appearance shifted too. Her skin glowed again. Her posture straightened. Her smile became genuine, not forced. Even Ethan noticed the difference. One morning, he touched her cheek and said, "Mummy, you look happy." The words melted her, because they reminded her of her purpose, to rebuild a home where her child felt safe in her joy, not her struggle. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "I will always be happy for you." In those small, everyday moments, Tonia felt something powerful forming inside her, self-respect blossoming into a new identity. Sheila's life unraveled faster than she could gather the pieces. Once she left Tonia's house that day, humiliation welcomed her like a cold wind. Her roommates stared at her with a mixture of judgment and pity as she returned looking disheveled, trembling, and broken. Her phone was flooded with messages, some mocking, some curious, some calling her names she had once thrown at others behind closed doors. Her workplace became unbearable. Colleagues whispered behind her back, sending glances sharp enough to cut. Clients, upon hearing the scandal, began withdrawing services from the catering business she worked for. Her boss called her into the office and said, with a tight jaw, "We don't tolerate drama that affects the brand." She was suspended indefinitely. But the worst blow came when Sheila discovered that Darrel had blocked her number. The man she had risked everything for, the man she believed might leave his wife for her someday, had now abandoned her in the middle of her storm. When she tried reaching him through another line, he answered once and said through clenched teeth, "Don't call me again. Ever." Then he hung up. That call shattered something inside her. She realized that she had not only lost dignity, she had lost direction. Her pregnancy no longer felt like a secret advantage. It felt like a burden resting on a foundation made of lies. In the quiet of her empty room, she cried until her voice broke. Her mind replayed Tonia's calm gaze, the kind of gaze only a woman wronged, yet strengthened, can carry. Sheila began to understand a bitter truth. When you build your life on another woman's tears, your own tears eventually drown you. She pressed her hands to her stomach and whispered, "What have I done?" In that moment, she felt the full weight of karma rest its hand on her shoulder. Darrel's life deteriorated in ways he hadn't expected. Every morning, he woke up hoping to see a message from Tonia. Every night, he slept with guilt gnawing at his chest. His appetite vanished. His work suffered. He missed deadlines. He snapped at colleagues. His boss called him in for a private meeting, asking if he was battling mental instability. He couldn't confess the truth. He simply nodded and apologized. At home, the silence haunted him. Every room reminded him of Tonia, the kitchen where she used to sing softly while cooking, the living room where Ethan played, the bedroom that now felt like a graveyard of shattered trust. One evening, unable to bear the emptiness, Darrel drove to Tonia's sister's house and parked outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. He sat in the car for nearly an hour, hands shaking, rehearsing what he would say. When he finally gathered courage and walked to the gate, Miriam appeared instead of Tonia. She looked at him with a calm disdain that stripped him bare. "Go home," she said quietly. "She doesn't want to see you." Darrel tried to speak, but Miriam closed the gate gently but firmly, shutting down the possibility of drama. The rejection hit him like a punch to the chest. He leaned against his car, fighting tears. Later that night, he sent Tonia his longest message yet, a confession, apology, and plea mixed together. He told her he couldn't breathe without her, that he would handle the pregnancy, that he hated himself for what he had done. He begged for counseling, therapy, a second chance, anything. He ended the message with, "Please don't let this be the end of us." But when he checked his phone repeatedly, there was no reply. And that silence was louder than any insult she could have thrown. The next morning, Tonia woke up feeling lighter than she had in years. She made breakfast, played music, danced with Ethan, and watered the flowers on Miriam's balcony. She wasn't pretending, she was healing. Around noon, her phone buzzed with Darrel's long message. She read it slowly, not with anger, but with clarity. It was the message of a man drowning in consequences, not a man reborn through transformation. She sat quietly for a moment, the sunlight warming her skin, and she realized she had no desire to return to the man who willingly built a second life behind her back. She opened her notepad app, typed one sentence, copied it, and pasted it into their chat. "I left you before life disgraced you, because I respect myself." Then she gently blocked his number. She exhaled deeply, feeling her spirit settle into its new rhythm. She placed her phone aside, picked up Ethan, and kissed his forehead. They stepped outside together, walking into a world where she was no longer a woman fighting to save a marriage. It was a world where she was building a new chapter on her own terms, carrying dignity like a crown that no betrayal could tarnish. The story did not end with Darrel's repentance or Sheila's regret. It ended with Tonia reclaiming the life she deserved. And that was her real victory.